An abandoned puppy chooses his human and refuses to let him go. What seems like a simple rescue on a stormy night quickly spirals into something far more dangerous. A quiet man takes in the helpless pup, but the dog's stubborn loyalty pulls him into a battle he never expected. Suddenly, it's not just about saving a stray, it's about standing against a powerful enemy, uncovering hidden secrets, and risking everything for the bond they share. But as the stakes climb higher, one question remains. When a man with nothing is pushed to fight for the only thing that won't leave his side, how far will he go? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. Thunder cracked across the dark Tennessee sky as Harlan Creek pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders. The evening shift at Frank's Gas and Go was finally over, and sheets of rain pounded against the metal awning above the pumps. Lightning flashed, illuminating the puddles that had formed in the cracked pavement of the parking lot. Harlan's weathered boots splashed through the water as he made his way toward the path that led to his modest home. The wind howled, whipping his jacket around his lean frame. At 38 years old, he'd walked this route countless times. But tonight felt different. The storm had an angry energy that made him quicken his pace. As he passed the rusty dumpsters, behind the station, a sound caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but there it was again. A tiny whimper, barely audible above the storm. Harlan stopped, raindrops running down his sun-creased face as he listened. Another whimper, definitely real this time. Harlan turned toward the sound, his eyes scanning the shadowy area between the dumpsters. There, huddled against the metal container, was a small shape trembling in the rain. Lightning flashed again, and Harlan's heart clenched at what he saw. A puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, covered in mud and shivering violently. "Hey there, little fella," Harlan said softly, crouching down. The puppy's eyes, bright despite its miserable condition, locked onto his. Without thinking, Harlan reached out, his calloused hands gentle as they scooped up the mud-soaked creature. The puppy didn't resist. Instead, it pressed closer to Harlan's chest, seeking warmth. Harlan quickly unzipped his jacket and tucked the small animal inside, feeling its cold, wet body against his work shirt. The familiar smell of gasoline that clung to his clothes was joined by the earthy scent of wet fur and mud. "I can't keep you," Harlan muttered, more to himself than the puppy, barely making ends meet as it is. But even as the words left his mouth, the puppy snuggled deeper into his jacket, letting out a contented sigh that seemed to say it had found exactly where it wanted to be. Harlan stood there in the rain, feeling the warmth of the small life against his chest. His practical side knew he should leave the puppy at the shelter in town, but something held him back. Maybe it was the way those eyes had looked at him, or how the little body had stopped shaking the moment he'd picked it up. "Just for tonight," he said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. "Just until the storm passes." The puppy responded by pressing its nose against his neck, its whiskers tickling his skin. Harlan found himself holding the bundle a little tighter as another crack of thunder shook the sky. He hadn't had a pet since he was a kid, before his older brother Clint had taken over the family property and made it clear there was no room for such luxuries. The walk home seemed longer than usual, as Harlan carefully shielded his tiny passenger from the worst of the rain. His boots squelched through mud, and twice he nearly slipped on the slick ground, but his arms remained steady around his precious cargo. As he approached his small shack, technically his brother's property but his home for the past decade, Harlan felt the puppy stir. He looked down to find those eyes watching him again, filled with complete trust. Something shifted inside him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. "Don't get too comfortable," he warned, but his tone was gentle. "This isn't permanent." The puppy responded by licking his chin with its warm tongue, and Harlan felt his resolve weakening. He knew he should be practical. His job barely covered. His basic needs and his brother's occasional visits always left him feeling smaller, more insignificant. A pet would just be one more thing to worry about, one more responsibility he couldn't afford. But as he climbed the creaking steps to his front door, the puppy still snuggled safely in his jacket, Harlan realized the little creature had already worked its way past his carefully constructed walls. It wasn't just seeking shelter. It was clinging to him as if it had found its home. Standing in his dark doorway, rain dripping from his clothes, Harlan looked down at the mud-covered puppy that had somehow found its way into his life. Those eyes met his again, and this time, Harlan couldn't look away. The puppy's paw pressed against his chest, right over his heart, as if making its own silent promise. "Okay," Harlan whispered, surprising himself. "Okay, but we'll figure this out tomorrow." The puppy's tail wagged weakly, spreading more mud across his already soaked jacket, and Harlan felt the corners of his mouth lift in a smile, something that hadn't happened in longer than he could remember. The county animal shelter stood, like a gray block against the morning sky, its metal doors gleaming with leftover raindrops from last night's storm. Harlan Creek gripped the cardboard box tighter, feeling the puppy shift inside. He'd fashioned a makeshift bed from an old towel, but the pup hadn't slept much, whimpering through the night. "This is better for both of us," Harlan muttered. More to convince himself than the dog. The shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he entered, making him squint. A young woman in blue scrubs looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cheerful despite the early hour. Harlan cleared his throat. "Found this one by the gas station dumpsters." He placed the box on the counter and the puppy's head popped up, those bright eyes fixed on him. "During the storm?" "Last night." The woman peered into the box, her expression softening. "Poor little thing. We'll get him checked out and cleaned up." She reached for the box, but the puppy scrambled back, pressing against the far corner. "Come on now," she coaxed, trying again. The puppy let out a high-pitched whine that made Harlan's chest tighten. When she finally managed to lift the dog out, it began squirming frantically. Its tiny paws scrabbled against her scrubs, and before either of them could react, the puppy launched itself through the air. Harlan instinctively caught it, and it burrowed into his jacket, trembling. Several people in the waiting area chuckled. Harlan's face burned hot with embarrassment as he tried to detach the clinging pup, but it only dug in deeper, letting out pitiful cries that echoed through the lobby. The woman smiled kindly. "Looks like someone's made their choice." Harlan stared down at the small bundle of fur pressed against his chest. The puppy's rapid heartbeat pulsed against his hand, and those eyes looked up at him with complete trust. Something inside him crumbled. I guess I'll keep him," he said quietly, the words surprising even himself. Back home, Harlan surveyed his nearly empty kitchen cabinets. He pulled out a can of tuna, splitting it between himself and the puppy, who wolfed down the offering. In seconds. "Don't get used to this," he warned. But the dog just wagged its tail, looking hopeful for more. The screen door creaked open later that evening, and Harlan's shoulders tensed before he even turned around. Only one person entered his house without knocking. "Well, well," Clint Creek's voice boomed through the small living room. "What's this I hear about my little brother playing animal rescue?" His expensive boots clicked against the worn linoleum as he strode in, looking out of place in his tailored shirt and designer jeans. The puppy, which had been dozing in a corner, lifted its head and growled softly. Clint's lip curled in disgust. "Picking up strays now, Harlan? Like you can afford another mouth to feed." He gestured around the modest room with its second-hand furniture. "You barely keep yourself above water as it is." Harlan's fingers curled into fists at his sides, but he remained silent. A familiar heaviness settling over him. This was how it had always been, Clint's voice filling all the space, pushing everything else aside. "You know what your problem is?" Clint continued, taking up his favorite spot on Harlan's threadbare armchair like he owned it. You waste energy on lost causes. Always have. That's why you're still pumping gas while I'm building something real. The puppy had gotten to its feet now, placing itself between Harlan and his brother, its small body rigid with protective intent. The sight of it, this tiny, hungry thing standing up to Clint, made something stir in Harlan's chest. He's not a lost cause, Harlan said softly, surprising himself again. He just needs a chance. Clint laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. A chance? Brother, some things are just meant to stay where they land, you included. He stood up, adjusting his expensive watch. Speaking of which, don't forget you're behind on your lot rent. I might own this land, but business is business. He strode toward the door, pausing only to add, Get rid of the mutt, Harlan. You've got enough weighing you down already. The screen door slammed behind him, and Harlan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The puppy padded, over, pressing against his leg with a soft whine. Harlan sank into his chair, suddenly exhausted. The dog immediately jumped into his lap, and this time, Harlan didn't push it away. Instead, he ran his fingers through the matted fur, feeling the steady warmth of the small body against his own. Guess we're both strays, huh? He murmured. And the puppy responded by licking his hand, its tail thumping steadily against his leg. For the first time that day, despite Clint's words echoing in his head, Harlan felt something that might have been the beginning of peace. As the days melted into one another, Harlan found himself developing a routine with the puppy. Every morning, he'd leave a bowl of water and whatever food he could spare, usually dry bread or scraps from his own simple meals. Don't get used to this, he'd grumble, even as he made sure to fill the bowls before heading to work. The puppy grew stronger each day, its coat becoming less matted and its eyes brighter. Despite Harlan's stern words, the little dog would wag its tail enthusiastically whenever he came home, dancing around his feet with unbridled joy. Harlan tried to maintain his distance, but found himself patting the pup's head more often than not. Just practical, he'd mutter to himself. Keeps it quiet, that's all. But in the quiet evenings, when the puppy would curl up next to his worn armchair, Harlan felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. One particularly humid afternoon, while Harlan was fixing a loose board on his front steps, a sleek black pickup truck rolled up his dirt driveway. The puppy, which had been playing with an old rope nearby, immediately ducked behind Harlan's legs. The truck's door swung open, and Clint Creek stepped out, his expensive boots raising small clouds of dust. Still keeping that mud, I see, Clint said by way of greeting, his lips curling into a familiar smirk. He was dressed in a crisp button-down, shirt and pressed jeans, clothes that screamed success, unlike Harlan's worn work uniform. It keeps the rats away, Harlan replied quietly, not meeting his brother's eyes. The puppy pressed closer against his legs, trembling slightly. Clint laughed, the sound sharp and without warmth. Well, you won't have to worry about rats much longer. He pulled out a thick envelope from his back pocket. Got some news you'll want to hear? Harlan's stomach tightened. He knew that tone. It usually preceded something that would benefit Clint at someone else's expense. Remember that developer I mentioned? The one looking at properties around here? Clint's smile widened. Well, they're interested in this whole strip. Planning to build a shopping center. The papers are nearly ready. Harlan's hammer slipped from his fingers, hitting the step with a dull thud. But these are people's homes. My home. Come on, little brother. These aren't homes. They're shacks. Clint gestured dismissively at the row of modest houses. Besides, business is business. The deal's too good to pass up. The puppy whimpered softly, and Harlan found himself straightening his shoulders slightly. I've lived here 15 years, Clint. And look what you've made of it, Clint scoffed. Same job, same dump of a house. Face it, Harlan, you're going nowhere. At least this way someone can make something of this land. For the first time in years, Harlan felt a flicker of anger in his chest. The puppy, sensing his tension, pressed against him supportively. "It's not right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clint's expression hardened. "Right? What's right is making something of yourself, not hiding away in a rundown shack with a stray mutt." He took a step closer, looming over Harlan. "You've always been weak, little brother. Always needed someone to make decisions for you. This is happening whether you like it or not." The puppy suddenly moved forward, placing itself between the brothers. Though small, it stood firmly, tail straight and alert. Harlan looked down at this tiny creature, defending him without hesitation, and felt something shift inside him. "I'll need you out by the end of the month," Clint said, already turning back to his truck. "Don't make this difficult, Harlan. It's just business." As Clint's truck disappeared in a cloud of dust, Harlan remained on his steps, the puppy now sitting quietly beside him. He looked at his small home, the crooked shutters he'd painted himself, the careful patches in the roof, the small garden he'd started in the back. It wasn't much, but it was his. The puppy nudged his hand gently, and Harlan found himself scratching behind its ears. "Guess we're both strays now, huh?" he murmured. But as he said it, he realized something had changed. For the first time in his life, watching his brother drive away, Harlan didn't feel the usual weight of resignation. Instead, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a quiet determination that surprised him. The puppy wagged its tail, looking up at him with complete trust, and Harlan felt his throat tighten. This little creature, which had refused to give up on him, was showing him something about standing his ground. He might not know how yet, but for the first time in his life, Harlan Creek was considering the possibility of standing up to his brother. The changes swept through the neighborhood like a cruel wind. Harlan watched from his window as 3 burly men in work boots stalked from house to house, their heavy footsteps echoing on wooden porches. Mrs. Martinez from 2 doors down hurried past, clutching her children's hands, tears streaking her face. Behind her, the sound of breaking glass rang out. "Just a taste of what's coming," one of the men shouted. "Best pack up now." Harlan's hands trembled as he drew the curtain closed. He knew these men worked for Clint, his brother's personal muscle who handled the messy parts of his business, deals. The puppy pressed against his leg, sensing his distress. "It's okay, little fella," he whispered, though his voice cracked. "We'll figure something out." But when he returned from his evening shift at the gas station, his heart stopped. His front door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, chaos greeted him. His few possessions scattered across the floor, dishes shattered, his single chair splintered against the wall. But worst of all, the puppy was gone. "No, no, no," Harlan muttered, dropping to his knees to look under the bed. He searched every corner, called out in increasingly desperate tones, but found nothing. Cold fear gripped his chest. Outside, he spotted Tommy, a local teenager who often hung around the neighborhood. The boy's face was pale as he approached Harlan. "They took your dog, Mr. Creek," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Heard Buck Johnson bragging about it down at the store. Said they locked it up in that old Peterson barn, the one that's about to fall down." He swallowed hard. "Said it was supposed to be a message from your brother." Buck Johnson. Clint's main enforcer, a man whose knuckles were as scarred as his conscience. The Peterson barn stood on the outskirts of town, its rotting beams visible. From the highway, everyone knew it was dangerous. The roof sagged inward, the walls leaned at sickening angles. Thunder rumbled overhead as Harlan drove his rusty pickup down the dirt road. Rain began to fall, first in scattered drops, then in sheets that turned the world gray. The barn emerged from the gloom like a twisted shadow. From inside came a familiar whimper. Harlan's legs shook as he approached the barn's warped door. A heavy chain wrapped around the handles, secured with a padlock. Another crack of thunder made the whole structure shudder. The puppy's cries grew more frantic. Without thinking, Harlan grabbed a fallen beam and smashed it against the padlock. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock finally broke. He yanked the chain free just as a massive groan came from above. The roof was starting to cave in. "Hold on!" Harlan shouted, plunging into the darkness. Debris rained down around him, rotted wood, rusted nails, decades of accumulated filth. He spotted the puppy huddled in a corner, trembling beneath a pile of moldy hay. A tremendous crack split the air. Harlan lunged forward, scooping up the dog just as a massive beam crashed down where they'd been standing. More followed, the whole, building groaning like a dying beast. Harlan clutched the puppy to his chest and ran. Splinters tore at his clothes, his face, but he didn't stop. He burst through the doorway as the barn collapsed behind them with a deafening roar. They tumbled into the mud, Harlan curling his body around the dog to protect it. For several long moments, they lay there in the rain, both shaking. The puppy licked Harlan's face frantically, whimpering with relief. Harlan sat up slowly, checking the dog for injuries. Besides being dirty and scared, it seemed okay. As he held the trembling creature, something shifted inside him. For the first time in his life, he'd stood up to his brother's cruelty, not with words or protests, but with action. The puppy snuggled closer, its trust absolute despite everything it had been through. Looking down at those faithful eyes, Harlan felt a strength he'd never known before. He might not have much, but he had this, the courage to protect what mattered, even in the face of his brother's shadow. The morning after the barn rescue, Harlan sat at his small kitchen table. The rescued puppy curled contentedly at his feet. His hands still bore scrapes from the splintered wood, but something else had changed within him. The fear that had ruled his life for so long was giving way to a quiet, determined anger. He pulled out a dusty box from under his bed, filled with papers their father had left behind. Property deeds, tax records, and old correspondence spilled across the table. As he sorted through them, discrepancies began jumping out at him. Dates that didn't match up, signatures that looked different on identical documents, properties that seemed to change hands through companies he'd never heard of. "Something's not right here," Harlan muttered, scratching the puppy's ears. The more he dug, the more troubling patterns emerged. His brother's name appeared on documents dated before. He'd even started his real estate business. Some deeds bore signatures from people Harlan knew had been out of state during those times. After 3 hours of research, Harlan knew he needed help. He'd heard talk around town about Margot Lane, a paralegal who worked at the county courthouse. People said she had a sharp eye for detail and wasn't afraid to question authority. Though his stomach churned at the thought of approaching someone so educated, Harlan gathered his courage and the most suspicious documents. The courthouse stood, tall and imposing, its brick facade making Harlan feel smaller than usual. Inside, he found Margot's office, a neat space lined with filing cabinets and law books. She looked up from her computer, her expression professionally distant. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she had better things to do. Harlan twisted his worn cap in his hands. "Ms. Lane, I'm Harlan Creek. I found some things about my brother's property deals that don't add up." Margot's eyes flickered with recognition at his last name. "Creek? As in Clint Creek's developments?" "Yes, ma'am. But these papers here," he spread the documents on her desk. "The dates don't match, and these signatures, I know for a fact, Mr. Johnson was in Florida when this was supposedly signed." Something in his earnest presentation made Margot pause. She picked up one of the deeds, her sharp eyes scanning the details. Her professional dismissiveness began to crack as she compared documents. "This notary stamp," she said slowly. "It's dated 2 years before this company was even registered." She looked up at Harlan with new interest. "Where did you get these?" "My father's papers." There's more too. Loans with impossible interest rates, properties changing hands through shell companies. I may just be a gas station attendant, but I can tell when numbers don't add up. Margot studied him for a long moment, her initial skepticism giving way to thoughtful consideration. Mr. Creek, what you're suggesting here, these aren't just clerical errors. If what you're showing me is legitimate, we're looking at systematic fraud. Harlan nodded solemnly. I know. And it's not just about saving my home anymore. Other families are losing everything because of these deals. This will take time to verify, Margot said, already pulling up databases on her computer. And if we find what I think we might find, your brother won't take this lying down. I understand the risk, Harlan replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. But I'm done being afraid of him. Margot's expression softened slightly. All right, Mr. Creek, let's start with these deeds and work our way backward. I'll need to see everything you have. For the next 2 hours, they pored over documents together. Margot's legal knowledge helped make sense of the complex paper trail, while Harlan's intimate knowledge of local history provided crucial context. With each discovery, the extent of Clint's fraudulent activities became clearer. This is more than just predatory business practices, Margot finally said, organizing the evidence into neat piles. Your brother has been systematically defrauding people for years, but proving it will take careful work. Harlan straightened his shoulders, feeling stronger than he had in years. Whatever it takes. These people deserve justice. Margot nodded, a hint of respect creeping into her expression. Come back tomorrow. We'll need to request some records from the state archive, and I'll show you what else to look for. As Harlan left the courthouse, he felt the weight of years, of submission, beginning to lift. The fight ahead would be difficult, but for the first time he wasn't facing it alone. His brother's shadow no longer seemed quite so dark or overwhelming. The county courthouse loomed before Harlan like a mountain he had to climb. His hands trembled as he clutched the thick manila folder containing weeks of careful research. Beside him, Margot Lane adjusted her glasses and gave him a reassuring nod. "Remember what we practiced," she whispered. "Just stick to the facts." The hearing room was packed with familiar faces from the neighborhood. Harlan spotted Mrs. Wilson from 2 doors down and old Pete, who ran the hardware store. Their presence made his throat tighten. These weren't just strangers, but people who'd known him his whole life. At the front of the room, Clint sat with his lawyers, looking perfectly at ease in his expensive suit. He barely glanced at Harlan, as if his younger brother was hardly worth noticing. "Mr. Creek," the commissioner called out. "You may present your evidence." Harlan's legs felt like lead as he walked to the podium. The microphone squealed slightly as he adjusted it, making him wince. He pulled out the first document with shaking fingers. "I've lived in Harlan Creek all my life," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone in the back called out for him to speak up. Harlan cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. "These properties that are scheduled for demolition, they've been part of our community for generations. But the paperwork showing my brother's ownership, it's not what it seems." One by one, Harlan laid out the evidence he and Margot had uncovered. He showed the original deeds side by side with Clint's versions, pointing out the mismatched signatures. He revealed the shell companies Clint had created, each one leading back to another in a dizzying circle of fraud. "Look at these dates," Harlan said, gaining confidence as he spoke. "The transfer papers are dated June 15th, but the notary stamp shows June 10th. How can a document be notarized 5 days before it was signed?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Clint's lawyer leaned over to whisper something in his ear, but Clint waved him off, his face darkening. "And here," Harlan continued, pulling out another document. "This signature supposedly belongs to Thomas Wheeler, but Mr. Wheeler passed away 3 months before this paper was signed. I have his death certificate right here." The commissioner leaned forward, studying the documents with growing concern. These are serious allegations, Mr. Creek. They're more than allegations, Margot spoke up from her seat. We have certified copies of every original document, plus witness statements from 2 former employees of Mr. Clint Creek's development company. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Mrs. Wilson covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head in disbelief. Even Pete, who'd always been friendly with Clint, looked troubled. For a moment, triumph surged through Harlan's chest. He'd done it. He'd finally stood up to his brother and exposed the truth. But then Clint stood up, and the familiar cold fear crept back into Harlan's bones. "This is ridiculous," Clint announced, his voice filling the room effortlessly. "My own brother, making up wild accusations because he can't accept progress. These properties are worthless shacks, and everyone knows it. I'm trying to bring development to this county, create jobs, improve lives. And this is the thanks I get?" The commissioner held up his hand. "Nevertheless, Mr. Creek, these documents require investigation. I'm suspending all demolition orders pending a full review." The hearing ended in chaos, with people arguing in heated clusters throughout the room. Harlan tried to slip out quietly, but Clint caught up with him in the empty hallway. "You stupid little fool," Clint snarled, grabbing Harlan's arm. "You have no idea what you've just done." Harlan tried to pull away, but Clint's grip was like iron. "Let go of me, Clint. You think this is over?" Clint's face was inches from his, twisted with rage. "I built everything I have from nothing, while you pumped gas and lived in that pathetic shack. You really think I'm going to let you destroy it all?" "You built it on lies," Harlan said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "I'm going to crush you," Clint promised, finally releasing Harlan's arm. "By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never opened that mouth of yours. That night, Harlan's truck windows were smashed. The next morning, he found his tires slashed. But it was the brick thrown through his window with a warning note attached that made him realize this fight was far from over. The violence was escalating, and Harlan knew his brother well enough to know Clint was just getting started. The county courthouse quieted as Harlan's voice grew stronger. With each document he presented, the evidence against Clint became undeniable. Forged signatures, altered dates, manipulated property records. The truth spilled out like water from a broken dam. Clint's face darkened with each revelation. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders or the dangerous glint in his eyes. When Harlan finished speaking, the room erupted in shocked whispers. The commissioners huddled together, their faces grave. Later that evening, as Harlan drove home along the winding back roads, his headlights caught a fallen tree blocking his path. He slowed to a stop, his heart pounding. Before he could shift into reverse, car doors slammed behind him. 3 men in dark clothes approached, their faces hidden in shadow. "Your brother sends his regards," one growled. The beating was swift and merciless. Fists and boots found their marks with practiced precision. Harlan tried to protect himself, but he was overwhelmed. Through the pain, he heard Clint's voice. "Should have stayed in your place, little brother." They dragged him to a muddy ditch and left him there, broken and bleeding. The night air grew cold around him as he drifted in and out of consciousness. It took hours before he could pull himself up, each movement sending waves of agony through his body. Stumbling home in the pre-dawn darkness, Harlan saw the orange glow first, then the smoke. His modest shack, the only home he'd ever known, was engulfed in flames. Fire trucks wailed in the distance, but he knew they'd be too late. Everything he owned was turning to ash before his eyes. Harlan sank to his knees in the dirt, defeat crushing him more thoroughly than any punch had. The manila folder with all his evidence was inside, along with every photo, every memory, every scrap of his life. Clint had won. He had nothing left. A weak whimper caught his attention. From beneath the burning porch, a familiar shape emerged. The puppy limped toward him, fur singed and dirty, but alive. Its tail wagged weakly as it reached him, pressing against his leg with unwavering trust. "You made it," Harlan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're still here." The puppy licked his bruised hand, its eyes full of simple, pure devotion. Despite its own injuries, it was trying to comfort him. Something shifted in Harlan's chest, a spark of defiance igniting where despair had reigned moments before. Clint could burn his home, destroy his possessions, even break his bones. But he couldn't touch this connection, this loyalty, this small creature's unshakable faith in him. For the first time, Harlan truly understood what he was fighting for. Not just a building or a piece of land, but dignity itself. The right to stand tall, to protect what mattered, to be more than what his brother said he could be. With trembling hands, he gathered the puppy close, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his chest. "We're not done," he murmured, more to himself than the dog. "You hear me? We're not done fighting." The puppy's warmth seemed to seep into his battered body, chasing away the cold of defeat. As the flames consumed his past, Harlan felt something new rising from the ashes. Not just anger or defiance, but a quiet, steely resolve. He wasn't just a victim anymore, not just Clint's shadow of a brother. He was someone who had found something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. Dawn broke over the smoking ruins of his home, painting the sky in shades of fierce orange and red. The puppy nestled closer, its presence a constant reminder that even when everything else was lost, some bonds couldn't be broken. Harlan stroked its singed fur, each gentle touch strengthening his determination. "They think they can break us," he said softly to the puppy. "But they don't understand. We're stronger than that now. Both of us." The fire trucks arrived, their sirens piercing the morning quiet. But Harlan barely heard them. He was already planning his next move, his mind, clearing despite the pain of his injuries. Clint had shown his hand, revealed just how far he would go. But instead of crushing Harlan's spirit, he had only succeeded in forging it into something harder, something unbreakable. The puppy looked up at him with complete trust, its tail still wagging despite everything they'd been through. In those eyes, Harlan saw his own reflection, not as the beaten-down gas station attendant, but as someone worthy of such unconditional loyalty. Someone who could stand up to bullies and corruption. Someone who could fight back. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of Margot's small law office as she and Harlan spread their evidence across her worn wooden desk. Papers, folders, and recordings created a maze of proof that would finally expose Clint's corruption. "Look at this," Margot said, her voice tight with excitement as she held up a bank statement. "The money trail is clear as day. Clint moved funds through 3 different shell companies before using them to pressure your neighbors into selling." Harlan nodded, his normally reserved demeanor replaced by quiet determination. The past few weeks had changed him. The bruises from his brother's ambush were still visible, but they seemed to have strengthened rather than weakened his resolve. And here, he pointed to a document with his calloused finger, the dates on these property transfers don't match the county records. He backdated everything to make it look legal. Margot watched him with growing admiration. When he'd first walked into her office, she'd seen a defeated man. Now she recognized something else entirely. A quiet strength that had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. "We've got recordings too," she reminded him, picking up a small digital recorder. 3 different conversations where he threatened you and the other residents. The quality is perfect. Harlan's puppy, now recovered from the fire, wagged its tail from its bed in the corner of the office. The dog had become a regular fixture during their planning sessions, its presence a reminder of what had started this whole journey. "What about witness statements?" Harlan asked, his voice steady. "Any more come forward?" Margot pulled out a fresh stack of papers. 4 more just yesterday. Once people saw you standing up to Clint, it gave them courage. Mrs. Patterson from the diner, Tom Wheeler who runs the hardware store. They're all willing to testify about his intimidation tactics now. They worked methodically, organizing their evidence into clear, irrefutable chains of proof. Harlan had surprised Margot with his attention to detail, his careful notes about dates and times, his clear memory of every interaction. He wasn't just participating in their plan, he was helping lead it. "We should make copies of everything," Harlan suggested, running a hand through his graying hair. "Store them in different places. Clint might try to destroy the evidence if he finds out what we're doing." Margot nodded, impressed by his foresight. "Already arranged. I've got digital copies secured in 3 different locations and physical copies in a safety deposit box at First National." The puppy trotted over to Harlan, placing its head on his knee. He absently scratched behind its ears, a small smile softening his weathered features. Margot found herself watching the gentle interaction, struck by how different this man was from her first impression of him. "You know," she said, sorting through another stack of documents, "when you first came in here with your suspicions about the land deals, I almost turned you away." Harlan looked up, meeting her eyes. "Can't blame you. I wasn't exactly confident." "Back then?" "No. But you were right, and you were brave enough to act on it, even when nobody believed in you." Margot's voice softened. "That's worth something." A slight flush colored Harlan's cheeks, but he didn't look away. "Had help, though. Couldn't have done any of this without you." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before both turned back to their work. The evidence before them painted a damning picture: forged documents, illegal financial transactions, recorded threats, and dozens of witness statements. It was enough to not just stop Clint's land grab, but to potentially send him to prison. "We'll present everything to the district attorney tomorrow," Margot said, straightening a pile of papers. "With this much evidence, they'll have to act. Your brother won't be able to buy or threaten his way out of this one." Harlan stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow across the desk. "All these years," he said quietly, "I let him convince me I was nothing, that I didn't deserve better than what he gave me." Margot rose too, standing beside him. "You proved him wrong. You proved everyone wrong." The puppy, sensing the moment's importance, pressed against Harlan's leg supportively. In the late afternoon, light, Margot could see the quiet dignity in Harlan's stance, the determination in his eyes. This wasn't the same man who'd timidly entered her office weeks ago. This was someone who'd found his strength, someone worth standing beside. "Tomorrow, then," Harlan said, gathering his courage for the final confrontation. "We end this." Margot nodded, her hand briefly touching his arm. "Tomorrow. And Harlan, you're not alone in this anymore." The simple truth of those words hung in the air between them as they finished organizing their evidence. They had built an ironclad case, but more than that, they had built something else, a partnership founded on trust, respect, and the shared belief that justice was worth fighting for. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as Harlan and Margot took their places at the plaintiff's table. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Harlan's puppy sat quietly by his feet, a special allowance from the judge given the animal's role in the case. Clint Creek sat across the aisle, his expensive suit and confident smirk a stark contrast to Harlan's simple attire. But today, Harlan didn't shrink from his brother's gaze. He stood straight, his shoulders squared, ready for what was coming. Margot presented their evidence methodically, her voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, we have documented proof of systematic fraud, intimidation, and illegal property seizures." She displayed enlarged copies of forged deeds, highlighting the discrepancies. "Mr. Clint Creek has been falsifying documents for years, forcing people from their homes through threats and violence." The recordings played next, Clint's voice filling the courtroom with threats and mockery. Harlan watched his brother's face darken as witness after witness testified about midnight visits from his enforcers, about broken windows and mysterious fires. When it was Harlan's turn to speak, he rose slowly. "My brother," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "taught me early that I was worthless, that I deserved nothing better than scraps from his table." The puppy pressed against his leg, giving him strength. "But he was wrong. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve a home." Clint's composure cracked. He shot to his feet, face red with rage. "You ungrateful little—" His eyes landed on the puppy, and something dangerous flashed in them. Before anyone could react, he lunged across the aisle. "You want to challenge me?" Clint snarled, grabbing for the dog. "Let's see how brave you are without your precious mutt." The puppy yelped, but Harlan moved faster than anyone expected. He stepped between his brother and the dog, drawing himself up to his full height. For the first time in his life, he looked down at Clint, seeing not the towering figure of his childhood, but a desperate, angry man. "No more, Clint," Harlan said, his voice steady. He pushed his brother back, not violently, but with unmistakable force. "You don't get to hurt anyone else, not the dog, not our neighbors, not me." The courtroom had frozen. Bailiffs moved forward, but Harlan and Clint remained locked in their confrontation. Years of pain and fear and anger crystallized in that moment. "You're nothing without me," Clint spat. "I made you! I gave you everything you have!" "No." Harlan's voice carried to every corner of the room. "You took everything I had, but not anymore." The bailiffs reached them then, pulling Clint back. He fought against them, his carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. "You can't do this to me! Do you know who I am?" The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "I believe we've seen exactly who you are, Mr. Creek. Bailiffs, take him into custody. The evidence presented here today warrants immediate arrest." As Clint was handcuffed, still shouting threats, the district attorney stood. "Your Honor, in light of Mr. Creek's actions today and the overwhelming evidence of fraud, we're prepared to file multiple criminal charges. We'll also be freezing his assets and launching a full investigation into all his holdings." Harlan watched as his brother was led away, feeling not triumph, but relief. The puppy pressed against him again, and he knelt to scratch its ears. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. "We're free." Margot touched his shoulder gently. "You did more than win a case today, Harlan. You showed everyone what real strength looks like." Around them, people were beginning to celebrate. Former victims of Clint's schemes hugged each other, crying with relief. Officials gathered to discuss the immediate implementation of property returns and compensation. Harlan stood in the middle of it all, his puppy at his side, finally free of his brother's shadow. He had stood up, not just for himself, but for everyone Clint had ever bullied or betrayed. For the first time in his life, he felt truly tall. "Let's go home," he said to the puppy, who wagged its tail in response. And for the first time in ages, home felt like a promise instead of a threat. The heavy courthouse doors swung open, letting in a flood of late-afternoon sunlight. Harlan Creek stepped out into the warm air, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the brightness. The puppy trotted beside him, its paws making soft clicking sounds against the concrete steps. No longer the frightened, mud-soaked creature from that stormy night, it walked with the same quiet confidence its master had found. People streamed past them, some patting Harlan on the shoulder, others stopping to shake his hand. Their words of congratulation and gratitude washed over him like a gentle wave. It felt strange, this newfound respect, but not unwelcome. The puppy wagged its tail at each person who passed, as if sharing in its master's victory. "You're quite the hero now," Margot Lane said, appearing at his side. She had shed her formal courtroom demeanor, and her smile held a warmth that made Harlan's heart skip. "How does it feel?" Harlan looked down at his hands, working hands, gas station attendant's hands, and thought carefully before answering. "Feels like waking up," he said finally. "Like I've been sleeping for years, letting life happen to me instead of living it." The puppy pressed against his leg, and Harlan reached down to scratch behind its ears. The simple gesture carried none of his old embarrassment about showing affection. This little one knew better all along, didn't it? Wouldn't let me hide anymore. Margot's eyes softened as she watched them together. Sometimes we need someone to believe in us before we can believe in ourselves. She touched his arm gently, and the contact sent a warm current through him. Though I have to admit, when you first walked into my office with your stack of papers and this scruffy pup, I didn't expect this. This? Harlan raised an eyebrow, feeling a new kind of courage stirring. "This version of you," she said softly. The man who stood up to his brother, who fought for an entire community, who wouldn't back down even when everything seemed hopeless. Down in the courthouse parking lot, their former neighbors were gathering, their faces bright with relief and joy. Old Mrs. Peterson was hugging her grandson, tears streaming down her face. The Martinez family stood in a tight circle, their children dancing around them. All people who would have lost their homes if not for today. "Mr. Creek! Mr. Creek!" Little Maria Martinez came running up the steps, her dark braids bouncing. She carried something in her hands, a slightly squashed cupcake with a single candle. "Mama says this is like a birthday because you helped us keep our home. You have to make a wish." Harlan knelt down, accepting the cupcake with grave ceremony, while the puppy sniffed at it curiously. "Thank you, Maria, but I think my wish already came true." "What was it?" she asked, eyes wide with curiosity. He smiled, thinking of that stormy night and the whimper that had changed everything. "I wished for courage. I just didn't know it would come with 4 legs and a tail." The gathering crowd laughed and more. People began climbing the steps to join them. Tom Wheeler, who had lost his repair shop to Clint's schemes, stepped forward with keys in his hand. "Harlan," he said gruffly, "my brother's got an empty apartment above his store. It's yours until you get back on your feet. No arguing now. We take care of our own." Harlan felt his throat tighten. "I appreciate that, Tom, but—" "He's right," Margot interrupted. "Your place was burned down, remember? You need somewhere to stay." Her eyes twinkled. "Besides, it's closer to town, closer to everything." The meaning in her words made his heart beat faster. The puppy wagged its tail, looking between them as if it understood perfectly well what was happening. Mrs. Peterson hobbled forward next, clutching a worn leather leash. "Found this in my attic," she said. "Been saving it for something special. Think it's about time this brave boy had a proper walking leash, don't you?" One by one, they came forward. People Harlan had seen every day but barely spoken to. People whose quiet lives had intersected with his own in the most unexpected way. Each had something to offer. A bag of dog food, a warm blanket, a word of thanks. Standing there on the courthouse steps, surrounded by this impromptu celebration, Harlan felt the last shadows of his old life fall away. He wasn't just the gas station attendant anymore, the quiet man who let life pass him by. He had found his voice, his strength, his place in the world. The puppy sat beside him, alert and proud, its presence a constant reminder of how it all began. One small act of kindness on a stormy night had led to this moment. One tiny creature's stubborn refusal to be left behind had shown him how to stand his ground. "You know," Margot said, watching the scene with bright eyes, "you never did give this little hero a name." Harlan looked down at the dog who had changed everything. "No," he said thoughtfully. "Guess I was too busy pretending I wasn't going to keep him." He crouched down, meeting the puppy's trusting gaze. "What do you think, boy? Ready for a proper name?" The puppy's tail thumped against the concrete, and its eyes seemed to sparkle with understanding. Harlan felt the rightness of the moment settle in his chest, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. "Dignity," he said quietly, "because that's what you gave me back." Margot's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently. "Perfect," she whispered, and in that simple word, Harlan heard the promise of something more. New beginnings, new possibilities, new horizons opening up before him. The sun was setting now, painting the courthouse steps in shades of gold and rose. People were starting to drift away, heading home to houses that were truly theirs again. But Harlan lingered, watching the light change, feeling the weight of the moment. "Ready to go?" Margot asked softly. Harlan looked at her, then down at Dignity, sitting faithfully at his feet. He thought about the path ahead, not just the practical matters of rebuilding his life, but the deeper journey of becoming the person he was meant to be. The person this brave little dog had always seen in him. "Yeah," he said, and his voice was strong and clear. "I'm ready." Together, they descended the courthouse steps into the golden evening light. Dignity trotted between them, the new leash, jingling softly, leading them toward whatever tomorrow might bring. And for the first time in his life, Harlan Creek walked with his head held high, unafraid of the future, knowing that true strength came not from power or money, but from the courage to stand up for what was right, and the loyalty to never stand alone. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.